Once upon a time, a little boy of 7 offered a hug to a woman crying on the street when a single father appeared. An unexpected love blossomed and changed 3 lives forever, a story of overcoming, redemption, and love. Subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up and comment where you are watching from. The March sun began its melancholic farewell over Fifth Avenue, tinting the mirrored glass of skyscrapers that rose like giants of concrete and steel. The frantic movement of the New York afternoon continued its relentless rhythm, hurried executives with smartphones glued to their ears, students carrying heavy backpacks, street vendors announcing their products with voices that got lost in the urban chaos. The characteristic smell of the metropolis, a mix of exhaust fumes, street food, sun-heated concrete, and the scent of cherry blossoms that stubbornly bloomed amidst all the asphalt, lingered in the air like an unmistakable olfactory signature of New York. Sarah Anderson was sitting on the sidewalk in front of number 1374, her back against the protective railing of a small flower bed where a few flowers bravely resisted urban pollution. Her fingers trembled uncontrollably as she held for the 10th time the letter on embossed paper she had received 3 hours earlier. The words seemed to dance before her red and swollen eyes. "Dear Ms. Anderson, we regret to inform you that your services will no longer be needed as of this date." The signature of the CEO, a man with whom she had worked side by side for 3 years, felt like a final stab in her back. Sarah was 32 years old, with carefully styled brown hair that was now disheveled from her anguish, and she wore a navy blue blazer that she had chosen the previous morning, thinking of the important meeting that never happened. Her honey-colored eyes, usually bright with determination and creativity, were dull from shock and a sense of betrayal. She had always been known at Creative Innovations as the advertising executive who arrived first and left last, the one who took on impossible projects and turned them into award-winning campaigns, the one who put the team's needs before her own. Her natural generosity and obsessive perfectionism had built her professional reputation, but had also made her vulnerable to unscrupulous bosses who took advantage of her dedication. "Why me?" she murmured to herself, feeling a new wave of tears burning her eyes. 3 years of my life, 3 damn years. Tears streamed down her face without her caring about the smudged makeup or the curious glances of passers-by. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions. How would she pay the rent for her apartment in Brooklyn? How would she explain to her mother, who was so proud of her successful daughter? How would she start over at 32 in an increasingly competitive market? It was then that a sweet voice like honey made her lift her eyes for the first time in 20 minutes. "Hi, you're crying. Why are you sad?" In front of her stood a little boy who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. His dark hair was tousled by the wind, his eyes were big and expressive, chocolate-colored, and a shy but genuine smile lit up his round little face. He wore a slightly oversized New York Yankees t-shirt and faded denim shorts. In his small hands, he held a red fire truck that looked like it had been very loved, with some loose parts and scratches that told stories of intense play. Sarah wiped her face with the back of her hand, trying futilely to disguise her tears. "Hi, sweetie. It's nothing, just a bad day." The boy tilted his head to the side, as children do when they are analyzing something very serious. "My dad says that when we're sad, a hug can help. Can I give you a hug? My hugs are really good." Sarah felt something stir in her chest, a pang of tenderness that cut through the bitterness. You want to hug me, but you don't even know me." "You don't need to know someone to be nice to them," the boy replied with the simple wisdom of childhood. "My grandma always says that, and you look like you need a friend right now." Before Sarah could respond, a male voice echoed over the noise of traffic. "Jake! Jake! Where are you?" The voice carried pure panic, that visceral fear that only parents know when they lose sight of their children in the urban crowd. Sarah looked up and saw a tall man running desperately down the sidewalk, his dark eyes scanning every face in the crowd. He looked to be around 35, with slightly disheveled black hair from desperation, wearing a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up and jeans. Even in his state of panic, it was impossible not to notice that he had a striking presence. Broad shoulders, an upright posture that betrayed confidence, and well-defined features that combined strength and sensitivity. "Dad! Dad! I'm here!" shouted Jake, waving energetically without letting go of his fire truck. The man turned in the direction of the voice, and Sarah could see relief flooding his face like a wave. He ran to them, immediately kneeling at his son's height, his large protective hands checking every inch of the boy as if he wanted to make sure he was really there, intact and safe. "Jake, my God, you scared me to death. How many times have I told you not to wander off, especially here on Fifth Avenue, for heaven's sake?" His voice trembled between relief and paternal reprimand. "Sorry, Dad, but I saw that she was crying and—" Jake pointed to Sarah, who was still sitting on the sidewalk, watching the scene with a mix of understanding and embarrassment. It was only then that the man truly noticed Sarah. Their eyes met for a moment that seemed to stretch beyond the normal, and she realized that he had the same sweet gaze as his son, but laden with the responsibility and maturity of someone raising a child. Sarah felt strangely safe amidst the emotional chaos she was experiencing. I'm sorry," he said, standing up and extending his hand to help her. "I hope my son didn't bother you. He has this tendency to want to help everyone he meets." Sarah accepted the help and got to her feet, noticing he was much taller than she had imagined. Their fingers brushed briefly during the gesture, and she felt a subtle electricity that surprised her. "He didn't bother me at all. In fact, he was very kind. He was offering a hug to comfort me." "It's true, Dad. She was really sad." "Can I give her a hug now?" Jake asked, looking between the two adults with the typical impatience of children. The man chuckled softly, and Sarah noticed that his smile completely transformed his face, softening the lines of worry etched on his forehead. "If the lady wants to, of course. But first, where are the manners I taught you? Introduce yourself." Jake straightened his shoulders with comic seriousness. "I'm Jake Henry Anderson. I'm 7 years old, and my dad is the best architect in New York. And you, what's your name?" Sarah couldn't help but smile, the first in many hours. "Nice to meet you, Jake Henry. I'm Sarah Anderson. I'm 32 years old, and I work in advertising. Or at least I used to." "I'm David Anderson," said the father, extending his hand again, this time for a formal handshake. "And I apologize again for the scare. I literally turned my back for 2 seconds to buy a juice, and when I looked back, he had vanished. I almost had a heart attack." "I can imagine," Sarah replied, shaking his hand and noticing he had calluses on his palms, hands of someone who worked, who built things. "It must be terrifying to lose a child out of sight here on Fifth Avenue. Dad, can I give her the hug now?" "She still looks sad," Jake insisted, tugging at his father's shirt. David looked at Sarah with an almost apologetic expression. "He really won't give up until he gets what he wants. It's a family trait, unfortunately." Sarah crouched down to Jake's height, opening her arms. "Come here, then. I think I really need that hug." Jake wasted no time, wrapping her in a tight embrace that smelled of children's shampoo and some fruity-scented soap. For a few seconds, Sarah closed her eyes and allowed herself to be just a woman, receiving the selfless affection of a child who didn't know her but cared enough to offer comfort. For the first time that day, she felt that maybe the world wasn't a completely cruel and lonely place. When they separated, Jake smiled triumphantly. "There, now you're less sad. My hugs always work, right, Dad?" David watched the scene with a thoughtful expression, as if he were witnessing something surprising. "Yes, son, your hugs are really special." Sarah stood up, feeling strangely renewed. "Thank you, Jake. You're right, I'm already feeling better." "Great. Now you can be friends too. Dad, can we meet Sarah again?" David blushed slightly. "Jake, that's not how things work. Sarah must have her own life, her own commitments." "Actually," Sarah heard herself saying before she even thought, "I work nearby. I mean, I used to. It's complicated." She gestured vaguely toward the office buildings. "We do too. Dad works over there." Jake pointed to an elegant building just 2 blocks away. "You guys can have coffee together." "Jake," David started, clearly embarrassed by his son's social ease. "No, it's fine," Sarah said quickly. "Maybe our paths will cross again. New York can be a big city, but sometimes it can be surprisingly small." David nodded, still looking a bit bewildered by the whole situation. "Well, we really need to go now. It's time for Jake's dinner, and we still have to stop by the grocery store." "Bye, Sarah. Remember what I said about hugs," Jake shouted as his father guided him back into the crowd on Fifth Avenue. Sarah stood, still for a few minutes, watching the 2 figures fade away until they completely disappeared among the pedestrians. For the first time since she had received that damn letter, she felt capable of taking a step forward. Maybe it was Jake's hug, or perhaps the unexpected kindness of 2 strangers, but something had changed in her heart. Storing the termination letter in her bag, Sarah began to walk toward the subway, her steps firmer than they had been in hours. For some reason, she had the strange feeling that this chance encounter was just the beginning of something she still couldn't fully comprehend. 3 weeks had passed since the meeting on Fifth Avenue, and Sarah still found herself thinking about the sweet smile of that little boy and the unexpected kindness of his father. As she walked through the streets of Brooklyn toward Mr. Johnson's bakery, where she had developed the habit of having her morning coffee while planning her professional future, the familiar aroma of warm French bread and freshly brewed coffee began to awaken her senses. The bakery was a traditional establishment, with its time-stained white tile walls, glass counters displaying golden pastries and tempting sweets, and the comforting noise of espresso machines that seemed to never stop. Mr. Johnson, a man in his 60s with a graying moustache and an apron always dusted with flour, knew every regular customer by name and had the gift of preparing coffee exactly how each one liked it without needing to ask. "Good morning, Sarah. The usual?" he asked with his characteristic country accent, already positioning a white cup under the coffee machine. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson." "Yes, please. And today, feel free to add extra sugar. I need some extra energy," she replied, choosing a table. Sarah sat by the window where she could observe the bustling street while organizing her thoughts. Sarah had spent the last 3 weeks on an emotional roller coaster. The first few days after her layoff were devastating. Sleepless nights, constant anxiety, and the terrifying feeling of having lost not just a job, but her entire professional identity. However, gradually, something began to germinate in her mind. The idea of finally starting her own advertising agency, a dream she had been postponing for years out of fear and insecurity. She opened her well-used silver Dell laptop and began to review her business plan notes for the 1,000th time. She had saved $53,000 over the past few years, money that was supposed to be used for a down payment on an apartment, but now represented her only chance at professional independence. The problem is that renting a decent office space will eat up almost half of that in a year, she murmured to herself, looking at the daunting figures on commercial real estate websites in Midtown Manhattan. And I still need money for equipment, business registration, initial marketing. Her screen displayed dozens of open tabs, real estate websites, tax calculators, entrepreneurship forums, and emails to professional contacts. She still hadn't had the courage to send. Every number she saw seemed more discouraging than the last. She was so focused on her financial spreadsheets that she almost didn't notice when a shadow fell over her desk. Sarah. Wow, what a coincidence. She looked up to find David Anderson standing next to her desk, wearing a navy polo shirt and jeans, carrying a brown leather portfolio that seemed to have stories to tell. His hair was neater than the last time she saw him, but his eyes still carried that mix of responsibility and kindness she had noticed during their first meeting. "David! Hi, what a surprise!" she said, quickly closing her laptop and gesturing to the empty chair in front of her. "Want to sit? Where's Jake?" "He's at school, thank God," he replied, pulling out the chair and sitting down with a sigh of relief. "You have no idea how hard it is to bring him to the city centre. He wants to stop and chat with everyone he meets." Sarah laughed, remembering the boy's outgoing personality. "I can imagine that must be a constant challenge. He seemed to have energy for 10 kids. He really does. But today was lucky. I managed to convince him that it would be much more fun to stay at school playing with his friends than to accompany me to boring meetings with clients." David waved to Mr. Johnson, who nodded back with familiarity. "Looks like you've discovered this hidden gem too. I come here whenever I have meetings in the area." "It's my new makeshift office," Sarah said, patting her laptop affectionately. "I'm trying to structure my own business, and I found that I think better with the city noise in the background than in the silence of my apartment." David leaned slightly forward, his eyes showing genuine interest. "Your own business? What kind of business?" Sarah felt a pang of insecurity. It had always been easier to talk about her career when she had the backing of an established company behind her. An advertising agency, small, focused on small and medium-sized businesses that need creative strategies but don't have the budget for big agencies. "That's fantastic," David exclaimed, and Sarah realized his enthusiasm was genuine. "I've always admired people who have the courage to start their own ventures. It must be scary, but also liberating, right?" "Scary, definitely," she admitted, nervously fiddling with the handle of her mug. "I'm still trying to figure out how to make it financially viable. The initial costs are substantial." Mr. Johnson appeared with a double espresso for David, who thanked him with a nod, as if he were already a regular customer. The steam from the coffee spiraled delicately between them, mingling with the aroma of pastries coming from the bakery. "Can I ask what was the trigger?" David said after taking a sip of his coffee. "I mean, what made you decide to leave the security of a job to venture out on your own?" Sarah hesitated for a moment. Telling a near stranger about her layoff felt like exposing a vulnerability she preferred to keep hidden. But there was something in David's calm, non-judgmental demeanor that made her feel safe, to be honest. "Actually, it wasn't really my decision," she said, lowering her voice. "I was laid off 3 weeks ago, right on the day we met on Fifth Avenue, by the way. That's why I was... Well, you saw how I was." David paused with the cup halfway to his mouth, his eyes filling with understanding. "Wow, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. You were going through that when Jake decided I needed a hug," Sarah finished with a sad smile. "And he was right. I really did need one." "He has a radar for these things," David said, his voice laden with paternal pride. "He always knows when someone needs a little love. Sometimes I think he takes care of me more than I do of him." "Do you raise him alone?" Sarah asked, and immediately blushed. "Sorry, I didn't mean to be intrusive. It's just that the way you interact, it seems like—" "No, it's fine," David reassured her, although Sarah noticed a shadow pass through his eyes. "Yes, it's just the two of us for 4 years now. His mother... well, she decided that motherhood wasn't compatible with her life plans." The careful way he chose his words didn't go unnoticed by Sarah. She recognized the tone of someone who had learned to talk about a deep wound in a way that wouldn't scare others or repress their own scar. "That must be challenging," she said softly. "It has its moments," David admitted, "especially at the beginning. I didn't even know how to do a ponytail. Decent. Imagine dealing with emotional crises, helping with first-grade homework, or explaining why some families are different from others." Sarah observed David's hands as he spoke. Large, strong hands, but with small scars that told stories of trial and error in solo parenting. His nails were cut very short, a wedding ring still worn on his right hand, and a small recent scratch that probably came from some adventure with Jake. "But from what I saw that day, you two make quite the team," she commented. "He taught me much more than I taught him, I can guarantee that," David said, and his face lit up with that smile that completely transformed his expression. "Including the importance of being kind to strangers who are having a tough day." David's phone vibrated, and he quickly glanced at the screen. "Sorry, it's from school. Let me just—" He answered quickly. "Hello? All good. Yes, I'll pick him up at 5. No problem at all. Thanks for letting me know." He hung up and turned to Sarah with a slightly worried expression. "Jake has a bit of a fever, nothing serious, but they're going to let him rest in the infirmary until I get there." "Oh no! Is he okay? Do you need to go pick him up now?" Sarah leaned forward, genuinely concerned. "No. They said it's just a little fatigue. He probably overdid it playing soccer at recess." David checked his watch. "But it means I'll have to cancel 2 meetings this afternoon." Sarah saw the worry settling on his face, not just for Jake, but for the professional implications of yet another interrupted workday. She recognized that expression, the same one she saw in the mirror when she had to choose between her career and the life priorities. "Do you do this alone all the time?" she asked. "I mean, when he gets sick or has some emergency." "Most of the time, yes. His grandparents live in San Francisco, so we only see each other on weekends. And I've kind of learned not to rely too much on other people for these situations." There was a resignation in his voice that made Sarah's heart ache. "That must be exhausting," she said, not quite sure what else to say. She wanted to offer help, but she barely knew David, and certainly had no experience with kids. David shrugged, a gesture that tried to minimize the weight he carried. "You adapt, and it's worth every second when you see you're raising a good person. You know, Jake he's special. Not just because he's my son, but because he really has a heart as big as the world." The conversation was interrupted when Mr. Johnson approached the table. "Sorry to interrupt, but are you two going to want anything else? We have fresh sugar bread coming out of the oven right now, still warm." "That sounds great, thank you," Sarah said. "I really have to go," David said, standing up and searching for his wallet in his pocket. "I need to reorganize my whole afternoon before I pick up Jake." "David, wait," Sarah heard herself say before fully thinking it through. "If you need anything, I mean, if Jake gets worse or if you need a hand with something, I'm always around, working. I don't know much about kids, but I can at least stay with him if you need to take care of something urgent." David paused mid-motion of putting away his wallet, looking at her with a surprised expression. "Sarah, that's very kind of you. But no, seriously, Jake was kind to me when I needed it most. And besides," she gestured to her laptop, "it's not like I have a very busy schedule lately." David hesitated for a moment, and Sarah could see an internal conflict unfolding in his eyes. He seemed to be weighing his obvious need for support against his reluctance to accept help from someone who was still practically a stranger. "That's a very generous offer," he finally said, "but you have your own challenges to deal with. I don't want to be another burden in your life." "You wouldn't be," Sarah replied more firmly than she expected. "In fact, it might do me some good to have a distraction from my own problems." David smiled, and Sarah noticed that there was a mix of relief and gratitude in his expression. "Thank you, Sarah. Really, it's rare to find people willing to help without expecting anything in return." "Well, your son taught me that sometimes kindness comes when you least expect it," she said, standing up as well. "Now go take care of him, and if you need anything, do you have my number?" David took out his phone and they quickly exchanged contacts. "I'll send you a message to let you know how he's doing," he promised. "Please do. And David," she called out as he was already walking away, "good luck with the meetings you managed to reorganize." He nodded, a grateful smile on his face, before quickly leaving the bakery and heading towards his car. Sarah sat back down, but found that she could no longer concentrate on her financial spreadsheets. Instead, she watched through the window as the city life continued its frantic pace, thinking of a feverish little boy and his father facing all the challenges of parenting alone. For some reason, she felt that her world was about to become a little more complicated and perhaps much more interesting. 2 weeks after the meeting at the bakery, Sarah was in her kitchen preparing homemade chicken soup when her phone rang. It was a rainy April afternoon, one of those typical of New York when the dark sky seems to collapse over the city in dense curtains of water that turn the streets into small rivers. The sound of the rain hitting against the windows of her apartment in Brooklyn created a melancholic symphony that perfectly matched her mood. "Sarah, it's David. Sorry to bother you on a Saturday afternoon, but—" His voice sounded. The atmosphere was tense, almost desperate, cut through by the noise of cars and sirens in the background. "Hey, David, don't worry. What happened?" Sarah turned down the heat on the stove and stepped away from the steam rising from the pot, sensing that something was wrong. "It's Jake. He has a high fever, 102 degrees, and he's been vomiting a lot. I've been at the St. Jude Children's Hospital for 2 hours and—" His voice trembled slightly. "His grandparents are traveling, visiting my ex-mother-in-law's sister in Rio, and they won't be back until Tuesday. And I don't know what else to do, Sarah. The doctor said it could just be a virus, but he's so weak." Sarah felt her heart tighten. She could imagine David alone in that cold, sterile hospital environment, trying to stay calm while watching his little boy suffer. "Where are you exactly? I'm on my way now." "No, Sarah, you don't need to. It was just a rant. You don't even know us well. It's not fair." "David," she interrupted firmly, already walking toward the bedroom. "Closet. Stop that. I'm going, and I won't take no for an answer. St. Jude Children's Hospital, pediatric emergency room, right?" A silence on the other end of the line, then a sigh filled with relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Sarah, seriously. I don't even know how—" "No need to thank me. I'm bringing some chicken soup I was making. It's my grandma's recipe. It cures everything," she said, already putting on a denim jacket and searching for her car keys. "I'll be there in half an hour." St. Jude Children's Hospital was one of the most modern and well-equipped hospitals in New York, but it still carried that characteristic atmosphere of all hospitals, the smell of disinfectant mixed with human anxiety, fluorescent lights that seemed to suck the life out of people, and the constant noise of hurried footsteps on the rubber floor. Sarah followed the signs to the pediatric emergency room, carrying a thermal bag with the soup and a bag with some things she thought might be useful: saltine crackers, chamomile tea, and a children's book she had impulsively bought at the pharmacy. She found David sitting in a blue plastic chair in the waiting room, with Jake sleeping in his lap. The boy looked even smaller than Sarah remembered, curled up against his father's chest, his little face flushed with fever and his lips dry. David was wearing a wrinkled shirt, his hair disheveled, and an expression of fatigue and worry that broke her heart. "How is he?" Sarah asked softly, pulling up a chair to sit next to them. "A little better. They managed to bring down the fever with medication, and he stopped vomiting an hour ago. But he's still very weak. David carefully adjusted Jake in his arms, as if any sudden movement could worsen his son's condition. The blood tests ruled out more serious issues. It seems to just be a strong virus, but it will take a few days to pass completely. Sarah observed David's face and saw the marks of tension from the last few hours. Red eyes, a deep line between his eyebrows, a tense jaw from clenching his teeth. It was obvious he hadn't eaten or rested since arriving at the hospital. "Have you eaten anything today?" she asked, already knowing the answer from his expression. "I haven't had time. Since I woke up to him vomiting at 6 in the morning, it's been a rush." David ran his free hand through his hair, a gesture that Sarah was beginning to recognize as a sign of stress. When you're a single dad, there's not much time to think about yourself in situations like this. Sarah opened the thermal bag and pulled out a steaming thermos. "Then it's time to change that. I brought warm chicken soup. It's a family Alvarenga secret recipe, tested and approved by generations of sick kids." The aroma of the soup filled the air, mixing with the hospital smell in a surprisingly comforting way. Sarah poured the golden liquid into a thermos cup and handed it to David. "Drink it while it's hot. It won't help if you get sick too." David accepted the cup with a gratitude that went far beyond hunger. "Sarah, I don't even know how to thank you. You dropped everything on your Saturday afternoon to come here, brought food." His voice faltered slightly. "It's been a long time since someone took care of me like this." "Don't be silly," Sarah said, feeling a tightness in her chest at the vulnerability in his voice. "This is what people do for each other. At least it's what they should do." Jake stirred in his father's arms, slowly opening his big eyes, still glazed with fever. When he saw Sarah, a weak but genuine smile appeared on his dry lips. "Sarah," his voice came out as a hoarse whisper, "you came to visit me in the hospital." Sarah leaned in closer, gently touching the boy's forehead. "Of course I did, sweetheart. I couldn't leave my friend with the magic hugs alone here, could I?" "I'm sick," Jake said with the seriousness with which children announce obvious facts. "My tummy hurt a lot, but now it's better. Dad was worried." "Parents always worry when their kids are sick. It's part of their job," Sarah explained gently. "But now you're in the hospital, with very smart doctors taking care of you. You'll be better soon." Jake solemnly nodded, then looked at the bag Sarah had brought. "What's in there?" "Oh, just a few things. I brought a nice tea that will help your tummy feel better, some crackers for when you feel like eating, and—" She pulled the book from the bag. "A new story for you." Jake's eyes lit up for the first time since Sarah arrived. "What story is it?" "The Boy and the River." "It's about a brave little boy who helps the animals in the forest when they get sick," Sarah said, showing the colorful cover of the book. "Do you want me to read a little bit for you?" Jake nodded, snuggling deeper into his father's arms. Sarah pulled her chair closer and began to read with a soft, rhythmic voice, perfect for calming a recovering child. As she read, she noticed that David was also listening attentively, his breathing gradually becoming calmer and more regular. And so, with his kindness and courage, the boy showed that even the small can make a big difference in the world. Sarah paused, realizing that Jake had fallen asleep again, this time with a much more peaceful expression. "You have a natural talent for this," David whispered, watching his son sleep soundly. "He rarely relaxes like this when he's sick." "It must be the magic of stories," Sarah murmured back. "My mother always said that a good story can heal almost anything." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching Jake sleep and listening to the distant sounds of the hospital. Footsteps in the hallway, quiet conversations among doctors, the occasional beep of some equipment. The rain continued to patter against the large windows of the waiting room, creating a cocoon of intimacy around the three of them. Sarah, David finally said, his voice laden with an emotion he seemed to be struggling to control. I wanted you to know that this, what you're doing, means more to me than I could express in words. Sarah looked at him, noticing how the fluorescent light of the hospital highlighted the lines of fatigue around his eyes, but also how his face had softened since she arrived. David, you don't have to... No, I do, he gently interrupted her. Since Jake's mother left, I've kind of gotten used to the idea that it was just the two of us against the world. I learned not to expect anything from anyone, not to rely on others, because I always ended up disappointed. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. She recognized that feeling of self-preservation, that fear of becoming vulnerable in front of others. And now? David looked at Jake sleeping in his arms, then back at Sarah. Now I'm starting to remember that some people are genuinely good, and that accepting help is not a sign of weakness. It's not, Sarah agreed. Sometimes it's a sign of courage. A nurse approached them, discreetly checking Jake's vital signs without waking him. The fever is under control and his heart rate is normal. The doctor said if he remains stable, you can go home in a few hours. They just want to observe him a bit longer to make sure he won't vomit again. Thank you, David said, clearly relieved. When the nurse walked away, Sarah turned to David. Do you want me to pick up some things for you at home? Clean clothes, medications, any specific food he likes? David hesitated for a moment, that internal conflict appearing in his eyes again. Sarah, you've already done so much. David Anderson, she said with a firm but affectionate smile, if you keep trying to send me away, I'm going to start thinking you don't like my company. He chuckled softly, the first genuinely relaxed sound he had made since she arrived. All right. If you really don't mind, could you grab a change of clothes for Jake and maybe the medications on the kitchen table? The house keys are in my pocket. Sarah took the keys he handed her, feeling the metal still warm from contact with his hands. What's the address? After jotting down the information, Sarah stood up. I'll be back in an hour. If he wakes up and asks for me, tell him I went to get a surprise for him. As Sarah left the hospital to face the rain of New York again, she carried with her more than just a simple to-do list. She carried the strange and comforting feeling that, for the first time in a long time, she was being truly useful in someone else's life, and that perhaps, just perhaps, she was also beginning to heal her own wounds by caring for the wounds of others. The aroma of chicken soup still lingered on her clothes, mixing with the scent of rain coming through the slightly open window of the car, creating an olfactory memory that would forever be associated with the day she discovered that family sometimes forms in the most unexpected places. David's apartment was in a modern building in the Upper East Side, a brick structure with large windows that allowed generous, natural light to flood in. Sarah ascended to the 12th floor, the heavy keys in her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't sure if it was from the responsibility of entering someone else's home whom she had known for such a short time, or from the strange intimacy that this gesture represented. When she opened the door, she was greeted by an environment that perfectly reflected David's organized and caring personality. The living room was decorated in neutral tones, beige sofa, grey rug, white walls, but the details revealed the constant presence of a child. Cushions with superhero prints, a half-built Lego tower on the coffee table, children's books scattered across the sofa, and Jake's drawings taped to the refrigerator. Sarah walked slowly through the apartment, absorbing the details that told the story of father and son. On the living room shelf, framed photographs showed Jake at various ages, always next to David, always smiling. There were also a few small trophies from youth soccer, architectural projects rolled up in a corner, and a succulent plant that clearly received regular care. Organized, caring, and responsible, Sarah murmured to herself, smiling as she noticed that even the scattered toys followed a certain logic of organization. She headed to Jake's room, which was a private universe of vibrant colors and childhood imagination. The walls were painted light blue with hand-drawn white clouds, clearly David's work, and there were stickers of planets and spaceships scattered across the ceiling. The bed was small, but Sarah snuggled under a cozy blanket featuring Toy Story characters, with at least 5 stuffed animals carefully arranged on her pillow. She chose a soft cotton pajama set with a firefighter print and placed it in the children's backpack she found hanging on the closet. Odor! Just as she was about to leave, something caught her attention. On the study desk, there was an open notebook with a drawing still in progress. It was clearly Jake's work, childish strokes filled with exciting details. The drawing depicted 3 figures: a tall man, a small boy, and a woman with long hair. They were all holding hands, and above them was a bright yellow sun with a giant smile. Sarah felt a tightness in her chest as she noticed that the woman in the drawing wore a blue blazer, exactly like the one she had on the day they met on Fifth Avenue. Jake had drawn the 3 as a family. She tucked away the feeling of tenderness mixed with a hint of anxiety and headed to David's room to grab a change of clothes for him too. She had noticed that his shirt was wrinkled and stained, probably from the hospital. The room was even more organized than the rest of the house. The bed made with military precision, clothes sorted by color in the wardrobe, and a desk with architectural plans carefully stacked. On the bedside table, a photograph caught her eye. It was Jake as a newborn, in David's arms, who looked both scared and in love at the same time. The date on the back of the photo read, Jake, 3 days old, Daddy, learning to change diapers. Sarah smiled, imagining a young and inexperienced David, determined to be the best father possible for his baby. In the kitchen, she found the medications that David had mentioned: children's fever reducers, homemade oral rehydration solution, and a small bottle of propolis. Evidence of a father prepared for any childhood health emergencies. She was putting everything in a bag when her phone rang. "Sarah, it's me. How's it going?" David's voice sounded more relaxed than before. "All good, I'm almost done. How's Jake?" "Much better. He managed to drink some water and said he's hungry. The doctor will discharge us soon." There was evident relief in his voice. "Sarah, thank you so much. I don't know how I'll repay you for all this." "You don't need to repay anything, David. That's what friends do." The word friends came out naturally but carried a weight that Sarah didn't expect. "Friends," David repeated, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I like the sound of that." When Sarah returned to the hospital, she found Jake awake and excited, sitting on the observation bed, telling a nurse about his favorite fire truck. David was beside him, visibly relieved, with color returning to his face. "Sarah," Jake shouted as soon as he saw her, "the doctor said I can go home, and that you brought me a surprise." "I did," said Sarah, handing him a small package she had prepared on the way, a modeling clay kit she bought at the hospital pharmacy. "So you can make sculptures while you rest at home." "Cool! I can make a firefighter." Jake hugged the gift to his chest, then looked at Sarah with his big, expressive eyes. "Sarah, can you stay with me at home today? Dad always gets nervous when I'm sick." Sarah glanced at David, who blushed slightly. "Jake, Sarah has her own life. We can't—" "Actually," Sarah interrupted, "I don't have anything planned for the rest of the day. If you don't mind the company, I can stay for a bit. Maybe I can make something light for dinner while you rest too." David looked at her with such intense gratitude that it made Sarah feel slightly dizzy. "Are you sure? You've already done so much." "I'm sure," she said firmly. "Besides, I want to see what Jake will sculpt with that clay." The ride back home was filled with Jake's animated chatter about his plans for the modeling clay, interspersed with sudden moments of sleep that indicated he was still recovering. Sarah sat in the back seat with him while David drove with extra caution, constantly checking the rearview mirror to see how his son was doing. "Sarah," Jake said sleepily during a traffic stop, "do you like my dad?" Sarah felt her cheeks warm and noticed that David tensed at the wheel. "Your dad is a very special person, Jake. Anyone would like him." "I think so too," Jake said with the simplicity of childhood. "He makes the best pancakes in the world and never forgets to read stories before bed, even when he's really tired." Sarah looked at David in the rearview mirror and saw him smiling, but there was also something vulnerable in his expression, as if his son's words had touched him in an unexpected way. Back at the apartment, Sarah naturally took charge of the kitchen while David helped Jake take a bath and put on clean pajamas. She prepared a light vegetable soup and whole grain toast, finding fresh ingredients that showed David was a competent cook who cared about child nutrition. "It smells great," David said when he came down with Jake, who was already in his pajamas with still damp hair. "Do you cook professionally too?" "Just as a hobby," Sarah replied, serving the soup in colorful bowls that were clearly special for Jake. "My mum always said that a good meal cures half the world's problems." "And your mum? Where does she live?" David asked while helping Jake settle at the table. Sarah hesitated for a moment. "She passed away 2 years ago. Cancer. It was just the two of us, so—" She left the sentence hanging, not wanting to burden the moment with her own sadness. David stopped what he was doing and looked at her with deep understanding. "I'm sorry, Sarah. It must have been very hard." "It was," she admitted, "but it taught me to value good people while they're here, and not to have fear of caring for those we love." Jake, oblivious to the seriousness of the conversation, was focused on sculpting his firefighter with the new modeling clay, occasionally taking small spoonfuls of the chicken soup. "Look, Sarah, the firefighter looks just like the one from my toy truck." "It's perfect," praised Sarah, genuinely impressed with the boy's creativity. As the evening progressed, Jake gradually became sleepier, finally falling asleep in David's lap while they watched a children's movie on the couch. Sarah watched the scene, father and son intertwined on the couch, Jake breathing peacefully, David gently stroking the boy's hair, and felt something stir in her chest, a tenderness she hadn't experienced in a long time. "I think someone is ready for bed," whispered David. "Do you want me to help?" Sarah offered softly. Together they carried Jake to his room, David carefully placing him in bed while Sarah arranged the stuffed animals around him. When they left the room, leaving the door ajar, they found themselves in the hallway in a moment of unexpected intimacy. "Sarah," David said quietly, "today you gave us something we haven't had in a long time." "What?" she asked, curious. "The feeling that we're not alone in the world," he replied, his eyes meeting hers in the softly lit hallway. Sarah felt her heart race. There, in that simple hallway of an apartment in New York, with the distant sounds of the city outside and the lingering smell of the soup she had prepared, she realized that something fundamental had changed between them. They were no longer just two strangers, brought together by the kindness of a child. They were people who had begun to care for each other in a way that was both frightening and deeply comforting. "I don't feel alone when I'm with you guys either," she admitted softly. David took a step closer, and for a moment Sarah thought he might touch her, but he simply stood there, looking at her with an intensity that made her stomach twist. "That scares me," he confessed. "Why?" "Because it's been a long time since I allowed myself to feel this way about someone, and because now it's not just about me. Any decision I make affects Jake too." Sarah nodded, fully understanding. "I get it. And I'm not asking for anything more than what we already have." "And what do we have?" David asked, his voice laden with a vulnerability that made her want to hug him. Sarah thought about the question, searching for the right words. "We have trust. We have mutual care. We have a wonderful child who brought us into each other's lives. And we have time to figure out what else might be there." David smiled, and Sarah saw the relief in his eyes. "Time," he repeated. "I like that. It doesn't have to be complicated, does it?" "It doesn't have to be," she agreed. "For now, we can just be." They stood there for a few more minutes, absorbing the weight and lightness of that moment, until Sarah decided it was time to leave. At the door, David hugged her, a long, tight embrace that smelled of masculine soap and safety, making Sarah realize that Jake had inherited much more than just his father's eyes. "Thank you," David murmured in her ear, "for everything." "Thank you," she replied, "for letting me be a part of this." As Sarah drove back home through the wet streets of New York, with the radio playing softly and the smell of rain coming through the window, she knew her life had changed irreversibly. She was no longer just Sarah, the unemployed advertising executive trying to rebuild her career. She was Sarah, the person David called when he needed help. Sarah, the woman Jake drew as part of his family. Sarah, someone who had found a place where she belonged, even without searching. And for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare her. In fact, it made her feel deeply alive. Continue trying again at Continue. Chapter 5. Revelations and Coincidences. 3 weeks after the hospital episode, Sarah was in her new morning routine at Mr. Johnson's bakery when Jake ran to her table with the characteristic energy of a completely recovered child. His eyes sparkled with excitement as he carried a Manchester United backpack and held tightly onto David's hand, who followed him with an amused smile on his face. "Sarah, Sarah, guess what I discovered?" shouted Jake, drawing the attention of other customers who smiled at the boy's contagious enthusiasm. "Good morning to you too, Jake," said Sarah, laughing and standing up to receive the morning hug that had become a ritual between them. "What did you discover?" "My dad built the building where you worked. I saw the pictures on his computer. It's true, right, Dad?" Jake looked at David with the expression of someone who had just uncovered an international mystery. Sarah felt a strange dizziness take hold of her. She looked at David, who seemed slightly embarrassed, his cheeks slightly flushed as he pulled out a chair to sit down. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice coming out higher than she intended. "It is," David confirmed, running his hand through his hair in a gesture Sarah now recognized as a sign of nervousness. "The commercial building on 5th Avenue, number 2847. My company designed and oversaw the construction 4 years ago. When you mentioned you worked in the area, I got curious. And when I researched the companies in the building, I saw that Creative Innovations was on the 15th floor. Sarah sat down slowly, her mind processing the information. "So you knew where I worked? Since when?" "Since our second conversation here at the bakery," David admitted, clearly uncomfortable with the admission. "But it didn't seem relevant to mention at the time. You were dealing with your layoff, planning your agency. I didn't want you to think it was a strange coincidence or that I was, investigating you." Jake, oblivious to the tension beginning to form between the adults, continued chattering. "And you know what else? The building has a... Yesterday my dad took me to see a beautiful fountain on the ground floor and some plants that climb up to the 3rd floor. I want to be an architect just like him when I grow up." Sarah forced a smile at Jake, but her mind was in turmoil. She watched David, trying to decipher if there was something more behind this omission. "And you thought I shouldn't know?" "Sarah, it wasn't anything sinister," David quickly said, his voice laden with an urgency that indicated he sensed the misunderstanding forming. When we met, you were vulnerable, going through a tough time. Mentioning that I designed the building of your former company would seem, I don't know, like the universe was playing a trick, or like I was trying to take advantage of the situation somehow. Dad, Jake interrupted, tugging at David's shirt sleeve. Why did Sarah look mad? David looked at his son, then at Sarah, clearly trying to find the right words. Jake, can we talk about this later? Why don't you go ask Mr. Johnson for some orange juice while Sarah and I talk? Jake hesitated, his childlike instinct sensing that something important was happening between the adults, but the promise of orange juice won over his curiosity. He walked away, but not before looking back at Sarah with concern. You guys aren't going to fight, right? I don't like it when people I love get mad at each other. The word love echoed at the table like a stone thrown into a calm lake. Sarah felt her heart tighten at the genuine worry in the boy's eyes. We're not going to fight, sweetheart. We're just going to talk, okay? Once Jake walked away, Sarah turned to David with a mix of confusion and a pang of betrayal that she hadn't expected to feel. David, I'm not mad. I'm confused. Since we met, you've had several opportunities to mention this. Why didn't you say anything? David leaned forward, his hands stretched out over the table as if he wanted to touch hers but lacked the courage to make the move. Because I was afraid you'd think I was trying to take advantage in some way. When I met you that day on Fifth Avenue, you were clearly in a moment of fragility. If I had come and said, by coincidence I designed the building of the company that fired you, what would you have thought? Sarah considered his words, and her irritation began to dissolve slowly as she understood the logic behind the omission. I would probably think it was too much of a coincidence to be true. Exactly. And then, when we started seeing each other more, when Jake got sick, when you were so kind to us, the moment to mention it passed, and it became weirder not to have said anything before. David sighed deeply. Sarah, I had no ulterior motives. When I saw you that day, crying on the sidewalk, I didn't think, oh, this is the woman from the building I designed. I thought, my son wants to help this person who is suffering, and maybe I should let him. Sarah studied David's face, searching for signs of dishonesty, but all she saw was the sincerity she had learned to recognize in him. And how did you find out which company I worked for specifically? Jake asked me a question, David admitted, blushing again. A few days after the hospital, he asked where you worked because he wanted to draw a gift for you. I said I didn't know, but he insisted so much that I ended up researching advertising companies in the area where you had mentioned you worked. And when you found Creative Innovations, I recognized the name immediately. It was one of the companies I visited during the final phase of construction to ensure that the spaces were meeting the specific needs of each tenant. David paused, observing Sarah's expression. Sarah, I swear that if I had known you worked there when we met, I would have mentioned it immediately. The omission was a judgment error on my part. Jake came running back with his orange juice, a foam mustache decorating his upper lip. So, are you done talking? Can I sit here again? Sarah looked at the little boy, then at David, and felt the tension completely dissipate. The sincerity on David's face, combined with Jake's innocent concern, made her realize she was overreacting. Of course, sweetheart. You can sit. So you guys aren't fighting? Jake asked, settling between the two adults with the visible relief of a child. We're not fighting, Sarah assured, reaching across the table to briefly touch David's hand. Sometimes adults need to talk about things that confuse them, but that doesn't mean they're fighting. David gently squeezed her hand before she pulled it away. Sarah, I'm sorry for not telling you earlier. You're right. I should have mentioned it. It's okay, she said, and realized she truly felt that way. In fact, what you did makes sense. If you had mentioned it that first day, I probably would have thought it was too much of a coincidence and would have been suspicious." "Really?" David asked, the relief evident in his voice. "Really? I was paranoid about everything and everyone. Back then," Sarah chuckled softly. "By the way, now that I know you designed that building, I have to say, the spaces are really well thought out. The natural light on the 15th floor was perfect for our creative team." David smiled, his first genuine smile since the conversation began. "I'm glad you enjoyed it. I always worry if the spaces I design truly meet the needs of the people who will use them." "So," Jake said, who had been patiently listening while sipping his juice, "does that mean you two already knew each other before meeting me? Like, were your houses connected?" Sarah and David exchanged glances and laughed at Jake's childlike interpretation of architecture and relationships. "Not exactly, sweetheart," Sarah explained. "It means your dad built the place where they were working, but they really only met that day on Fifth Avenue when you decided that I needed a hug." "Oh," Jake said, absorbing the information. "So the universe wanted you to meet, but it needed me to make it happen." David laughed, shaking his head at his son's peculiar logic. "Maybe that's exactly it, Jake." Sarah watched father and son, feeling a wave of familial tenderness. The small crisis had passed, but it left something important in the air, the confirmation that they had reached a point where omissions, even small ones, mattered, where honesty was not just expected, but necessary. "David," she said when Jake got distracted watching a pigeon outside the window, "next time you have something you think I should know, even if it seems strange or poorly timed, tell me, okay? I'd rather deal with weird coincidences than late surprises." "I promise," David said, extending his pinky like a child. "Total honesty pact." Sarah intertwined her pinky with his, smiling at the sweet childishness of the gesture. "Total honesty pact." "Yay!" shouted Jake, who had turned his attention back to them just in time to see the gesture. "Now you guys are pinky friends. That's even stronger than regular friends." As they walked back through the offices of Midtown Manhattan after coffee, Sarah looked up, observing the building where she had worked for 3 years with completely new eyes. She now knew that David had carefully planned every detail of that structure, had supervised every phase of construction, and had cared about creating spaces that worked for the people who would occupy them. "It's strange," she commented, "knowing that you designed the place where I spent so many hours of my life. It's like, I don't know, like you were already part of my story before we even met." "And maybe you were," David said softly, observing his own work. "Maybe some people are destined to cross paths even if indirectly." Jake, walking between them and holding both their hands, swung his arms joyfully. "I like it when the universe makes secret plans for people to be happy." Sarah and David exchanged glances over Jake's head, both smiling at the accidental wisdom of a 7-year-old. And maybe Jake was right. Maybe the universe really did make secret plans. Maybe some meetings were more than mere coincidences. Maybe some connections were simply inevitable. The summer fair was in full swing when Sarah, David, and Jake arrived at the main square of the neighborhood. The June air carried the unmistakable aroma of spiced cider with cinnamon and cloves, sweet popcorn, and warm corn pudding coming from the makeshift booths. Colorful flags fluttered between the trees, creating a festive ceiling over the hundreds of people circulating among the game booths, typical foods, and musical performances. Sarah had chosen a blue and white floral dress that perfectly matched the festive atmosphere, while David wore a red plaid shirt and jeans. Jake had insisted that everyone should dress like real country folk for the occasion. The boy was ecstatic in his complete summer fair outfit: yellow plaid shirt, suspenders, straw hat, and an expression of pure happiness that made anyone smile just by looking. "Dad! Sarah! Look at all the booths!" Jake ran ahead, his eyes shining at the endless options for fun. Can I play the fishing game and the ring toss and, wow, there's a secret admirer. Booth, can I send a letter to someone? Calm down, Jake, David laughed, catching up to his son before he got lost in the crowd. We have all night. Let's take our time to enjoy everything. Sarah watched the interaction between father and son, feeling that familiar sensation of tenderness mixed with a little melancholy. She saw families everywhere, couples with children, grandparents carrying grandchildren, groups of siblings running between the booths, and wondered what it would have been like to grow up in a family like that, with traditions and celebrations repeating year after year. Sarah, have you ever been to a summer fair before? Jake asked, returning to her with a bag of popcorn that had magically appeared in his hands. A few times when I was a kid, she replied, accepting some popcorn he offered. But never one as lively as this. Do you come every year? Every year since Jake was born, David said, surveying the environment with the attentive gaze of a father needing to watch an energetic child in a crowd. It's our tradition, and this year is special because we have company. Sarah felt her cheeks warm slightly at the comment, but before she could respond, a feminine voice interrupted her. David, what a surprise to see you here. They turned to find a woman in her 40s, elegantly dressed in a black dress that seemed too expensive for a neighborhood summer fair. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, makeup flawless, and she held a glass of red wine that clearly hadn't been purchased at any of the local booths. Beside her was a man in business attire, also visibly out of place in the setting. Hi, Carla, David replied politely, but Sarah noticed a certain tension in his posture. How are you? Very well. We were passing by after dinner and decided to take a peek at the fair. Carla kissed David on the cheek with familiarity, then bent down to hug Jake. Jake, my love, how you've grown. You're more handsome every day. Hi, Aunt Carla, Jake replied politely, but without his usual enthusiasm. Sarah noticed he moved slightly closer to his father. Carla stood up and looked directly at Sarah with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And you must be Sarah Anderson, she said, extending her hand. Nice to meet you. Sarah, Carla repeated, shaking her hand with unnecessary force. What a beautiful name. And how did you all meet? Sarah felt a pang of discomfort at the investigative tone. Sarah is a great friend of ours. We met a few months ago. Oh, how interesting. Aunt Carla tilted her head, studying Sarah from head to toe in a way that made her feel like a specimen under a microscope. And what do you do, Sarah? Advertising, Sarah replied, maintaining a friendly tone despite her growing discomfort. What a coincidence. My husband here, Carla gestured to the man beside her, also works in the field. Roberto, this is Sarah. She works in advertising. Roberto nodded politely, but Sarah noticed he seemed more interested in wrapping up the conversation and leaving than discussing work. Aunt Carla, Jake interrupted, tugging at her dress, are you going to stay to see the dance? It's starting soon and it's going to be so much fun. Oh, sweetheart, we can't stay too long, but it's great to know you're having fun. Carla smiled at Jake with genuine affection, then looked back at Sarah. And you, Sarah? Do you live here in Brooklyn? I do, Sarah replied, starting to feel like she was being interviewed for a position she didn't know existed. That's nice. It's such a quirky neighborhood. The way Carla said quirky sounded more like a criticism than a compliment. David, you didn't tell me you were seeing someone. David shot a glance at Sarah, then at Jake, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Carla, as I said, Sarah is a friend, a very special friend, but... Of course, Carla said with a smile that definitely didn't reach her eyes. It's just that, well, you know how it is. After everything that happened with the previous situation, we Just want to make sure you're being careful, especially with Jake involved." Sarah felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. The implication was clear. She was seen as a potential threat, someone who could hurt David or, worse, Jake. She looked at David, hoping he would defend her, but saw he was clearly awkward, trying to find a diplomatic way to end the conversation. "Aunt Carla," Jake suddenly said, his voice more serious than usual, "Sarah is really nice. She took care of me when I was sick, and she makes the best chicken soup in the world. You would like her if you got to know her better." Jake's innocence and loyalty brought tears to Sarah's eyes. A 7-year-old was defending her better than David himself. "I'm sure she's very kind, dear," Carla said, but her voice carried a condescension that made Sarah clench her fists. "We just want you and your dad to be happy." "We are happy," Jake said with the firmness that only children can muster. "Sarah makes us even happier." An awkward silence settled among the adults. Roberto finally spoke up. "Well, I think we should be going. It was a pleasure to meet you, Sarah." "Likewise," she replied, forcing a polite smile. Carla kissed Jake again and said goodbye to David with another kiss on the cheek. "David, call me next week. We need to talk about that issue we discussed." When they finally walked away, Jake looked up with confusion. "Why was Aunt Carla strange with Sarah? She's usually nicer." David ran his hand through his hair, the gesture of nervousness that Sarah knew well. "Jake, why don't you go buy a candy apple for yourself? Here's some money." As Jake walked away, David turned to Sarah with an apologetic expression. "Sarah, I'm sorry about that. Carla is complicated." "Who exactly is she?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice neutral despite the irritation she felt. "She's Jake's mother's sister-in-law, the sister of her ex-husband. She and the family have always been a bit protective of Jake since his mother left." David sighed. "Carla thinks she has the right to weigh in on who I date because it could affect Jake. And do you agree with her?" The question came out sharper than Sarah intended. David looked at her, surprised by the tone. "What? No, Sarah, of course not. It's just that it's complicated. She's known Jake since he was a baby, helped a lot when his mother left. I can't just ignore her." Sarah felt a growing frustration. "David, she basically attacked me in front of your son. Suggested that I'm some kind of dangerous opportunist, and you just stood there without saying anything." "I said you were a special friend," David protested, but his voice didn't sound very convincing even to himself. "A special friend," Sarah repeated bitterly. "After months of everything we've been through together, after I took care of Jake when he was sick, after all the conversations, all the moments, I'm a special friend?" David looked around, realizing that their conversation was drawing attention from some nearby people. "Sarah, we can't discuss this here. Jake will be back any minute." "Oh, of course. We can't discuss it in front of Jake. We can't define our relationship in front of other people. When exactly can we talk about what's happening between us, David?" Jake came running back with his candy apple, clearly oblivious to the tension that had settled among the adults. "Look, it's perfect. Sarah, do you want to share it with me?" Sarah looked at Jake's excited little face, then at David, who seemed to be struggling internally with something. "You know what, sweetheart? I'm getting a headache. I think I'm going to head home early." "No!" Jake stopped chewing, his eyes filling with disappointment. "Sarah, the dance hasn't even started yet, and we haven't even played the fishing game." "Jake is right," David quickly said. "Sarah, please stay. Don't let Carla ruin our night." Sarah looked between father and son, feeling her heart divide. Sarah didn't want to disappoint Jake, but she also couldn't pretend everything was fine after what had happened. "David, I think you both should enjoy the party. We need some time to think about a few things." David stepped closer to her. "Sarah, please, don't do this. We can talk after the party when Jake is asleep. Don't ruin his night because of my rude ex-sister-in-law." The music for the square dance began to play, and Jake looked between the two adults with an expression that mixed confusion and sadness. "Are you two fighting again? Because of Aunt Carla?" "She's always like that, Sarah. Dad says it's because she worries about everything." Sarah knelt down to Jake's height, gently touching his face. "We're not fighting, sweetheart. Sometimes adults need time to think about things, but this has nothing to do with you, okay? You're perfect." "But are you coming back?" Jake asked, his voice small and vulnerable. Sarah looked at David, who was watching her with an intensity that made her feel even more confused. "Of course I'm coming back. I just need a little time, all right?" She kissed Jake's forehead and turned to leave, but David gently held her arm. "Sarah, don't go like this, please." "I have to, David. I need to think about what we really are to each other. And you need to think too." She gently pulled away from his touch. "When you can answer what I am in your life, besides a special friend, call me." As she walked away through the crowd of the party, Sarah could hear Jake asking his dad why she had left, and David's hesitant response. The sound of the square dance and the laughter from the party gradually faded, replaced by the noise of city traffic, but the bitter taste of the conversation with Carla and the disappointment in David's reaction lingered in her mouth like sour spiced cider. For the first time since she had met David and Jake, Sarah questioned whether there was really a place for her in that family, or if she was just deluding herself about the importance she had in their lives. A week had passed since the summer fair, and Sarah found herself looking out the window of her apartment in Brooklyn, watching the fine July rain create small rivers on the sidewalks. Her laptop was open on the coffee table, displaying a financial spreadsheet she should have been reviewing for her agency, but her mind was completely elsewhere. The phone beside her remained stubbornly silent, just as it had for the past 7 days. David hadn't called. Sarah had created a different routine to avoid Mr. Johnson's bakery, where she knew she might run into David and Jake. Instead, she had started working at a cafe in the Olympic Village on the other side of the city, where the impersonal atmosphere and the constant noise of executives in business meetings helped her focus on her work and temporarily forget the emptiness she felt in her chest. "Maybe I overreacted," she murmured to herself for the 10th time that morning, absent-mindedly stirring the cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Or maybe I was too realistic. Her agency was finally starting to take shape. She had secured 2 small clients who were pleased with her work, and referrals were starting to appear timidly. But each small professional victory was accompanied by a pang of sadness because she had no one to celebrate with. She had gotten used to sharing her joys and worries with David, and she discovered that solitary success tasted far less sweet than she had imagined. Meanwhile, 20 kilometers away, David was sitting at his desk in the office, staring blankly at an architectural plan without really seeing it. His colleagues had already commented that he had been checked out for the past few days, making small attention errors that were uncharacteristic of his normally impeccable work. "Dad, why doesn't Sarah come over for coffee with us anymore?" Jake had asked for the 3rd time that week during breakfast at Mr. Johnson's bakery. David had tried to explain in simple words. "Sometimes adults need time to think about things, son." "But she said she would come back. It's been a long time," Jake insisted, his big eyes filled with a sadness that broke David's heart. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, Jake, you didn't do anything wrong. It was Dad who did some things wrong." The conversation repeated almost daily, and each time David felt more guilty for not standing up for Sarah at the party, for not making it clear to Carla and everyone what exactly Sarah's place was in their lives. The problem was that David was also struggling to understand exactly what that place was. Sarah had become such a natural part of his and Jake's routine that he hadn't stopped to define what she represented. It was more than a friend, that was obvious. But labeling what they had as dating or a relationship terrified him in a way he couldn't fully explain. "David, can I talk to you for a minute?" His partner, Carlos, pulled him out of his thoughts. "Sure." David turned in his chair, trying to focus on the work conversation. "Man, I don't want to meddle in your personal life, but you've been visibly upset about something for a week. It's affecting your work, and I'm worried." Carlos sat down in the chair across from David's desk, his expression serious but friendly. David sighed, running his hands over his face. "It's complicated, Carlos. Want to talk? Sometimes it helps to talk to someone who's not involved in the situation." David hesitated for a moment, then began to tell Carlos about Sarah, about how she had come into their lives, about the summer fair and the discussion they had. Carlos listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding. "Let me see if I understand," Carlos said when David finished. "You met an amazing woman who gets along with your son, who supports you, who takes care of you, both when you need it, who clearly cares about you too. And you're afraid of what exactly? Of being disappointed again, of Jake getting too attached and then she deciding that life with a single dad is too complicated, of—" David paused, searching for the right words. "Of admitting that I'm in love and her finding out that I'm not what she expected." "David," Carlos said patiently, "you've been through all this before. Sarah has already seen you at the hospital with Jake sick. She's seen you desperate and worried. She's seen your insecurities as a single dad. And yet, she keeps showing up, keeps taking care of you both. What more proof do you need that she won't leave at the first sign of trouble?" David fell silent, absorbing his friend's words. "And another thing," Carlos continued. "From what you've told me, she's not asking for a declaration of eternal love or a marriage proposal. She just wanted you not to treat her like a shameful secret in front of your annoying sister-in-law." "She's not a shameful secret," David protested. "Then why did you act like she was?" The question echoed in David's mind for the rest of the day. Why had he acted that way? Why hadn't he simply introduced Sarah as someone important in his life? Why had he let Carla talk to her that way without intervening more firmly? The answers came gradually, and they all pointed to the same place: fear. Fear of becoming vulnerable again, fear of admitting that he had found someone who truly mattered, fear that by naming what he felt, he might lose it. That night, after putting Jake to bed, David lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and reliving every moment he had spent with Sarah. He remembered how she had come to the hospital without hesitation, how she had cared for Jake with such tenderness, how she laughed at his bad jokes, how beautiful she looked when she was focused on working on her laptop. He also remembered the expression on her face at the summer fair, the disappointment in her eyes when he hadn't defended her properly, the way she had bent down to say goodbye to Jake, even though she was clearly hurt. "I'm an idiot," he murmured into his pillow. Jake appeared at the door of his room at 7 in the morning, still in his pajamas, carrying his favorite fire truck. "Dad, I had a dream about Sarah." David sat up in bed, pulling his son close. "What kind of dream, buddy?" "She was sad, sitting alone at a cafe table, and I wanted to give her a hug, but I couldn't get to her." Jake snuggled against his father's chest. "Dad, do you think she's sad? Do you think she knows we miss her?" David felt a pang in his heart. "I think so, Jake. I think she's sad too." "Then why don't we go talk to her? You always say that. When we do something wrong, we have to apologize and try to fix it." The simplicity of the child's logic hit David like a bolt of lightning. Jake was right. completely right. You know what, buddy? You're absolutely right. Today, after school, we're going to find Sarah and we're going to talk to her. We're going to apologize and we're going to try to fix things. Jake's eyes lit up. Really? Can we? We can. But first, Daddy needs to think about how to explain to her what she really means to us. Jake tilted his head, thoughtful. Dad, do you want me to help you? I'm really good at explaining feelings. David laughed, kissing his son's head. You know what, Jake? I think I'll take your help. As they prepared breakfast together, David finally began to feel that maybe it wasn't too late to fix the mistake he had made. Maybe Sarah would give him a second chance to show that she wasn't just a special friend. She was the person who had brought light back into their lives, and he was willing to fight for that. But first he needed to find her, and he hoped that when he found her, she would be willing to listen to him. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when Sarah finally decided to face her feelings and return to Mr. Johnson's bakery. 2 weeks of silence had been enough for her to realize that running away wasn't solving anything. It was only making her feel lonelier and more confused. She needed normalcy, the familiar aroma of French bread and espresso, and perhaps a definitive answer about what was really between her and David. When she pushed open the bakery door, the familiar bell chimed, and Mr. Johnson waved with his usual warm smile. Sarah, I've missed you, girl. Where have you been? Hi, Mr. Johnson, I was just sorting some things out. Sarah chose her usual table by the window, but this time she sat with her back to the entrance, not wanting to be easily seen if David and Jake showed up. The usual? Mr. Johnson asked, and Sarah nodded in confirmation. She had only been there for a few minutes, trying to focus on responding to client emails, when she heard a familiar voice that made her freeze. Dad, look, Sarah's table, she's back. Jake's excited voice echoed through the bakery. Sarah briefly closed her eyes, took a deep breath and slowly turned around. Jake was running toward her with his radiant smile, followed by David, who looked nervous and hopeful at the same time. Sarah! Sarah! I knew you would come back. I dreamed about you. Jake threw himself into her arms before she could prepare emotionally for the encounter. Sarah hugged him tightly. Jake felt how much he missed that unconditional affection. Hi, dear. How are you? I'm fine, but I really missed you. Dad did too, but he didn't want to admit it. Jake stepped back slightly, looking directly into her eyes with the brutal honesty that only children possess. David approached cautiously, his nervous hands fiddling with the car keys. Hi, Sarah. Can we sit? Sarah hesitated for a moment but nodded affirmatively. Jake immediately settled into the chair next to her, while David sat across from them, creating a tense yet familiar triangle. Sarah, David began, his voice more serious than usual, I need to talk to you. I need to explain. Dad, remember what we talked about being honest with feelings? Jake interrupted, looking at David expectantly. David smiled nervously. Yes, Jake, I remember. You're right. He turned to Sarah, took a deep breath and began. Sarah, I was a coward at the summer fair. I should have defended you better. I should have made it clear to Aunt Carla exactly what you mean to me and to Jake. And what do I mean? Sarah asked, her voice carefully controlled. David looked at Jake, who nodded encouragingly, then back to Sarah. You mean everything. You mean that for the first time in 4 years I wake up thinking about someone other than Jake. You mean that when something good happens in my day, the first person I want to tell is you. You mean that Jake has someone else to confide in besides me, someone who cares for him as if you were my mom, Jake simply completed. Because that's how I feel when I'm with you, Sarah, like you're my family. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. Jake, and that's why it was so hard when you left, David continued. because I realize that you're not just someone who showed up in our lives. You're someone without whom we can no longer imagine our lives." Sarah discreetly wiped away a tear that escaped. "David, I missed you both so much too, but I can't accept being treated like a secret or someone who's just visiting your lives. I need to know where I fit in." "You fit right here," Jake said, touching her chest over her heart. "And here," he touched his own chest. "And here too," he touched his father's chest. David smiled at the simple wisdom of his son. "Jake is right. Sarah, I was afraid to admit how much you matter because—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because," Sarah encouraged, "because admitting that I'm in love with you means admitting that I want you to be a real part of our family. And that scares me because it means I have so much more to lose if it goes wrong." The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Sarah watched David's face, searching for signs that he was only saying what he thought she wanted to hear, but all she saw was raw sincerity and vulnerability. "Dad said the L word," Jake said cheerfully, making both adults laugh nervously. "What L word, Jake?" Sarah asked, drying her eyes. "In love. He said he's in love with you. I knew it for a long time, but he was being stubborn about saying it." David blushed deeply. "Jake, it's true, Dad. You always get happy when Sarah arrives, and you always get sad when she leaves. And you talk about her all the time, even when she's not here." Sarah looked at David with a mix of amusement and tenderness. "Is that true?" "Yes," David admitted, giving up on trying to maintain any dignity. "It's true. Jake probably knows you better than I thought because he observes everything." "And I observe." "You two too," Jake said proudly. "Sarah, do you like my dad?" Sarah felt her cheeks heat up. Being interrogated by a 7-year-old about her romantic feelings was surreal but also strangely comforting. "Yes, Jake, I really like your dad." "And do you like me?" "I love you, dear," Sarah replied without hesitation, realizing it was true. She had fallen in love not just with David, but with Jake too, with that small, imperfectly perfect family. Jake smiled triumphantly. "Then it's settled. Problem solved. Now you can officially date, and I can tell everyone that Sarah is my almost mom." "Jake," David said quickly, "things aren't that simple." "Why not?" Jake asked, genuinely confused. "You both like each other. I like both of you. You both like me. What more do you need?" Sarah and David exchanged glances over Jake's head, both realizing that a 7-year-old had simplified something they had unnecessarily complicated. "You know what, Jake?" Sarah said slowly. "Maybe you're right. Maybe things can be that simple." David reached across the table, gently touching Sarah's hand. "Sarah, I'm so sorry for everything that happened at the summer fair. I'm sorry for not being clear about my feelings, for making you feel undervalued. You're not a special friend. You're the woman I've fallen in love with, and I want everyone to know that." "Including Aunt Carla?" Sarah asked with a half-smile. "Especially Aunt Carla," David replied firmly. "By the way, she called yesterday wanting to set up a dinner for us to talk. I think it's the perfect time to make things clear." "And are you going to take me along to dinner?" Jake asked hopefully. "No, son. This is a boring adults' dinner talking about boring adult things," David said. "But you can help Dad choose an outfit to impress Sarah." "I'm already impressed," Sarah said softly. "Impressed that you two came after me, impressed by your honesty, and impressed that a 7-year-old managed to solve in 5 minutes what took us 2 weeks to complicate." Jake stood up in his chair and reached out, his arms wrapped around him. "Family hug to seal the deal?" Sarah and David stood up, enveloping Jake in a collective embrace that smelled of coffee, sweet bread, and new possibilities. Mr. Johnson watched from a distance with a satisfied smile, as if he had known from day one that this story would end exactly like this. "Sarah," David murmured in her ear during the hug, "I love you. I don't know why it took me so long to say that." "I love you too," she whispered back. "And I love this little boy who brought us together." "I can hear you," Jake said cheerfully, "and I love you both too." When they separated from the hug, all three were smiling, but there was still a hint of nervousness in the air. Sarah knew that declaring love was just the first step. There were still practical issues to resolve, families to face, and the challenge of building a life together. But looking at David and Jake, she knew it was worth trying. It was worth fighting for that makeshift family she had found so unexpectedly. "So now what?" David asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Now," Sarah said, "we'll figure out how to make this work, together." "Together," Jake echoed, taking the hands of both adults. "I like the sound of that." 3 weeks after the reconciliation at Mr. Johnson's bakery, Sarah stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, nervously adjusting the pearl necklace she had chosen for dinner at Aunt Carla's house. David had insisted it was time to formally introduce her as his girlfriend to all the relatives who considered themselves guardians of Jake. And Sarah had agreed, despite the butterflies in her stomach whenever she thought about the meeting. "Calm down, Sarah," she murmured to herself, observing her reflection. She had chosen a discreet navy blue dress, elegant without being flashy, trying to find the perfect balance between respectable and authentic. They're just people who care about Jake, normal people who want the best for him. Her phone rang, and David's picture appeared on the screen, a photo Jake had taken, without them noticing, where David was laughing at something she had said, his eyes filled with genuine joy. "Hi, love," she said, still getting used to how naturally affectionate words now rolled off her tongue. "Hi. How are you feeling? Nervous?" David's voice carried a mix of affection and anxiety. "A little bit," Sarah admitted. "And you?" "Terrified," David confessed with a nervous laugh, "but determined. Jake is here beside me giving me tips on how not to say anything stupid in front of the family." Sarah laughed, imagining the scene. "What kind of tips is he giving?" "One moment." She heard David pass the phone to Jake. "Sarah!" The boy's excited voice filled the line. "I told Dad he has to say that you're really smart, really pretty, and that you make the best chicken soup in the world, and that you help me with math homework better than he does." "Hey!" Daniel protested in the background. "It's true, Dad. You don't have the patience for first-grade math," Jake continued. "Sarah, are you nervous? Because Aunt Carla sometimes says boring stuff, but she's not bad. She just worries about me because she's known me since I was a baby." Sarah felt a wave of tenderness for Jake's emotional maturity. "I'm a little nervous, yes, but I'm happy to get to know the people who care about you better." "They're going to like you," Jake said with absolute confidence. "There's no way they won't." David returned to the phone. "I'll pick you up in 15 minutes, okay? And Sarah, thank you for agreeing to do this. I know it's not easy." "We're in this together," Sarah replied. "Literally." Aunt Carla's apartment was in the Upper East Side, in a classic building with elegant doormen and old elevators with bronze doors. As they ascended to the 9th floor, Jake chattered nervously about who would be at dinner, evidently trying to prepare Sarah for what awaited her. "Aunt Carla, whom you already know, Uncle Robert, who is pretty quiet, Grandma Lucy, who is my real grandma's sister but treats me like a grandson too, and maybe Uncle Fernando, who talks really loud and always asks about baseball." David gently squeezed Sarah's hand. "It's going to be fine," he murmured. The door opened before they even knocked, revealing Carla with a smile that seemed genuinely warm, wearing a beige linen outfit that screamed, "Perfect hostess!" Sarah noticed that she had clearly made an effort to be more welcoming than she had been at the summer fair. "David, Jake, my love!" Carla kissed both of them, then turned to Sarah with what seemed to be sincerity. "Sarah, it's so good to see you again. Please come in. Make yourselves at home." The apartment was elegantly decorated in neutral tones, with classic furniture and an impressive view of the city. In the living room, an elderly lady with grey hair stood up with a warm smile, clearly Grandma Lucy that Jake had mentioned. "Sarah, this is Lucy, the mother of Jake's mom," Carla introduced. "Lucy, this is Sarah, Daniel's girlfriend." Sarah noticed the slight pause before the word girlfriend, but chose to interpret it as a natural adjustment of language, not as reluctance. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Lucy," Sarah said, extending her hand. "Oh, no need for Mrs., just call me Lucy," the lady replied, ignoring the outstretched hand and warmly embracing Sarah. "Jake won't stop talking about you. He said you make the best chicken soup in the world and that you teach math better than his dad." "Grandma Lucy," Jake protested, blushing. "It's true, isn't it? Come here, Sarah, sit here next to me. I want to know everything about this girl who has won the hearts of these two men in my life." Sarah sat down next to Lucy, feeling immediately more relaxed. The lady had a genuine maternal energy that reminded her of her own grandmother. "Lucy, I—" "Interrogate Sarah right away," said Carla, bringing a tray with margaritas. "Let's have dinner first, talk later." "Nonsense, Carla. I haven't seen David this happy in a long time. I want to get to know the person responsible for that." Lucy turned to Sarah. "Tell me, dear, how did you two meet? Jake told me one version, but I want to hear it from the adults." Sarah shared the story of their meeting on Fifth Avenue, Pedro's kindness, the coffee at Mr. Johnson's bakery, and gradually realized that her anxiety was dissolving. Lucy laughed at the right moments, asked pertinent questions, and clearly approved of what she was hearing. Frank joined them. He was indeed a quiet but cordial man, and soon they were all seated at the dinner table, which Carla had clearly prepared with care. The atmosphere was comfortable until Frank arrived. "Sorry for the delay, everyone. Hellish traffic out there." Frank burst in like a hurricane, kissing everyone and speaking at a volume that made Jake shrink slightly. When he was introduced to Sarah, he greeted her enthusiastically, but Sarah noticed a scrutinizing look in his eyes. During dinner, a delicious shrimp risotto accompanied by salad and white wine, the conversation flowed naturally. Jake shared funny stories from school, David talked about an interesting architectural project, and Sarah found herself gradually relaxing, participating in the conversations and laughing at Frank's jokes. It was in the middle of dessert that the atmosphere subtly shifted. "Sarah," said Frank, putting his fork down, "David told me you have your own company now. How's it going?" "It's gradually growing," Sarah replied. "I started a few months ago after leaving the company I worked for before. It's been challenging but rewarding." "And financially, is it enough to support yourself?" Frank's question, posed casually, carried an implication that made Sarah stiffen slightly. "Frank," David warned quietly. "What?" "It's a legitimate question. We're talking about the financial stability of someone getting involved with a single father. Jake needs stability." Carla quickly intervened. "Frank, that's very personal." "No, it's fine," said Sarah, keeping her voice calm but firm. "It's a valid concern. Yes, Frank, my company is sustaining itself. I'm not earning what I used to at a big company yet, but I'm building something solid and sustainable. And I can assure you that my interest in David and Jake has nothing to do with financial security." Sure, Frank said quickly. "I didn't mean to imply anything. It's just that, well, after what happened with Jake's mother—" "Frank, stop!" David's voice was low but filled with authority. "Sarah is not Jake's mother, and that comparison is unfair to everyone involved." Jake, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Uncle Frank, Sarah isn't like my mom. My mom left. Sarah stays, even when I get sick, even when Dad gets annoying, even when bad things happen. She stays." The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes at Jake's simple but powerful defense. Lucy was the first to speak. "Jake is right. And Frank, you're being rude. Sarah is clearly a good person who cares about our family. That should be enough for you." "I'm sorry," Frank murmured, visibly embarrassed. "I didn't mean to sound aggressive. It's just that we all care a lot about Jake." "I understand the concern," Sarah said softly. "And actually, I'm glad to know that Jake has so many people who care about him. But I want you to know that I care about him too, and about David. They have become my family as well." Carla, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. "Sarah, can I ask you a direct question?" "Of course." "What are your intentions with David and Jake, long term?" Sarah looked at David, who nodded encouragingly, then at Jake, who was watching her with absolute trust, and finally at Carla. "My intentions are to love both of them, support them, and build a life together with them. I don't know exactly what that life will look like, whether we'll live together, whether we'll marry, whether I'll formally adopt Jake one day, but I know I want to discover all of that with them. And I know I'll do everything in my power to never hurt them." Carla studied Sarah's face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "That's all I needed to hear. I'm sorry if I was hard on you at the summer fair. It's just that after Jake's mother left, I felt responsible for protecting both of them from more disappointments." "I completely understand," said Sarah, "and I hope that over time you'll see that you don't need to protect them from me. I hope you'll see that I'm on their side." "I already see it," Lucy said warmly, "and I completely approve." Jake got up from his chair and ran to hug Sarah. "See, I told you they would like you." As Sarah hugged Jake, looking over his head at David, who smiled. With pride and relief, she knew they had passed another important test. It wouldn't be the last. Building a family from 3 people with different histories would never be simple, but each obstacle overcome made them stronger. And Sarah was ready to face any challenges that came, because she had finally found where she belonged. December arrived in New York with its characteristic warmth and the promise of a new year approaching. Sarah stood on the balcony of her agency's new office, a spacious and bright space in the commercial complex that David had designed in Silicon Valley, watching the city's hustle and bustle through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. 6 months had passed since that dinner at Carla's house, and her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. "Sarah, another client has arrived," shouted Julia, the young intern who... Marina had hired Julia the previous month, rushing with a stack of papers in hand. "The cafe on the ground floor wants a complete digital marketing campaign." Sarah smiled, observing the contagious enthusiasm of the 22-year-old who had brought youthful energy to her small but growing company. "Great. Schedule a meeting for Friday. And... Julia?" "Yes?" "Breathe. We won't be able to handle everyone at the same time, but we'll do our best for each client." Julia laughed, clearly still getting used to the pace of a small agency where every project mattered immensely. "You're right. It's just so exciting to see everything growing like this." Sarah nodded, turning her attention back to the laptop where she was finalizing a campaign for an organic products company. Her agency had found its niche, small and medium-sized businesses with social and environmental purposes that needed creative and authentic strategies. The work was challenging and sometimes financially unstable, but every morning she woke up excited to start the day. Her phone rang and Jake's picture appeared on the screen, a selfie he had taken with David at the park, both making funny faces. "Sarah! Sarah!" Jake's excited voice echoed through the phone. "Guess what?" "What, dear?" Sarah asked, automatically smiling at the boy's enthusiasm. "Dad said you can come with us to San Francisco this weekend. We're staying at Grandma Rose's house and they really want to meet you. You can come, right, please?" Sarah felt a pang of nervousness mixed with joy. Meeting David's Parents would be another important step in her relationship, not just with him, but with the whole family structure of Jake. Of course, dear. It would be an honor to meet your grandparents. Yay, Dad, she said yes. Jake shouted away from the phone, then came back. Sarah, Grandma Rose already said she's going to make that banana pie she makes when we have special guests, and Grandpa John said he's going to teach you how to play dominoes. David took the phone. Hey, love. Are you sure you don't mind? My parents can be a bit intense. Intense. How? Sarah asked, closing her laptop and leaning back in her chair. My mom will want to know everything about you, from where you were born to what your favorite color is. My dad will try to convince you that the New York Yankees are the best team in the world and tell embarrassing stories from my childhood. Sarah laughed. Sounds perfect. I'm looking forward to meeting them. Are you sure? Because once you meet my parents, there's no turning back. They're going to adopt you as their daughter and start demanding regular visits. David Anderson, Sarah said in a mock-serious tone. Are you trying to scare me or completely win me over? Both, he confessed, and Sarah could hear the smile in his voice. I'll pick you up at 6? 6 works perfectly. After hanging up, Sarah spent a few minutes looking out the window at the city, reflecting on how much her life had changed. A year ago, she was sitting on the sidewalk of Fifth Avenue, crying and feeling completely lost and alone. Now she had a thriving business, a boyfriend who loved her, a child who called her family, and she was about to meet the grandparents of that child who had stolen her heart. Sarah, Julia appeared at the door of her office. Can I ask you a personal question? Of course. How did you know David was the one? Like, how did you know it was worth the risk? Sarah considered the question, remembering her own doubts and fears at the beginning. You know, Julia, I think it wasn't a rational decision. It was more of a feeling that for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to fit into a version of myself that I thought others wanted. With David and Jake, I could just be me, and they liked who I was, not who I pretended to be. And you weren't scared. I was terrified, Sarah admitted. I still am sometimes. But I found that the fear of getting hurt was less than the regret of not trying. Julia nodded thoughtfully. Thank you. Do you need anything else today? Because I have a date at 8 and wanted to fix my hair. Go, and good luck on your date. When Julia left, Sarah returned to her laptop to finish the final details of the project. She was so focused that she almost didn't notice when David appeared at the door of her office, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers, her favorite flowers, which he had discovered by noticing that she always stopped to admire them at the flower shops on the street. What a surprise, she said, getting up to hug him. Weren't you supposed to pick me up at 6? Jake is at soccer, so I thought I'd come early to see you working. I like seeing you in your element. David looked around the office, clearly proud. And I wanted to give you this, he handed her, an envelope along with the flowers. What's this? Sarah asked, curious. Open it. Inside the envelope was a key and a handmade card from Jake. The card showed a drawing of 3 figures, a man, a woman, and a child, in front of a house, with the word family written in colorful, childlike letters. David. Sarah looked at the key, then back at him. What is this? David took a deep breath, visibly nervous. It's the key to our apartment. I mean, if you want it to be ours. Jake and I were talking, and we both agreed that it's time for you to have your own drawer in our dresser, your own space in the closet, and your own coffee mug with your name on it. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. You want me to live with you? We want you to officially be part of our family. Not just on weekends or when Jake is sick or when we need help. We want you there when we wake up in the morning, when we watch movies at night, when Jake has nightmares, when I'm having a bad day at work. David held her hands, We want you in all the boring and wonderful parts of daily life." Sarah looked at Jake's card, with its simple drawing, but filled with love. And does Jake really want this? It was his idea, actually. Yesterday he asked me why you didn't live with us for real. He said it didn't make sense for you to go to your house every night when you could just stay. Sarah laughed through tears. The logic of a child always makes more sense than that of an adult. So, what do you think? Sarah looked around her office, then at David, then at the key in her hands. I think it's the best proposal I've ever received in my life. David kissed her, a long and sweet kiss that tasted of coffee and promises. When they parted, Sarah noticed Julia standing at the office door, clearly having witnessed the whole scene. "Sorry to interrupt," Julia said with a huge smile, "but that was the cutest thing I've ever seen in my life." "Julia," protested Sarah, blushing. "What? It really was. Can I tell everyone that my boss is engaged?" "We're not engaged yet," David quickly corrected. "Not yet, but one step at a time." Sarah looked at him with surprise and joy. "Not yet? Not yet?" David confirmed with a mysterious smile. "But first, let's see how you do with my parents." 2 hours later, they were on the road to San Francisco, with Jake chattering excitedly in the back seat about all the places he wanted to show Sarah at his grandparents' house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and the music on the radio created a perfect soundtrack for that transitional moment. "Sarah," said Jake from the back seat, "when we get to Grandma and Grandpa's house, can you help me find seashells on the beach tomorrow? Dad never has the patience to look for the pretty ones." "Of course, sweetheart. We'll find the prettiest seashells on the beach." David reached out and took Sarah's hand, intertwining their fingers. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For saying yes. For agreeing to be a part of all this. For—" He paused, searching for the words. "For saving us." Sarah squeezed his hand. "You both saved me." "Dad, Sarah, stop saying all that mushy stuff," Jake exclaimed from the back seat. "We're here! Look, Grandma and Grandpa are on the porch." Sarah looked out the window and saw an elderly couple waving energetically from the porch of a white house with a blooming garden. Her stomach did a little flip of nervousness, but looking at David and Jake, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. As David parked the car, Jake was practically bouncing with excitement. "Sarah, you're going to love Grandma and Grandpa, and they're going to love you too. It's impossible not to love you." Sarah smiled, gently touching the boy's face. "I love you too, sweetheart, both of you." And when they got out of the car to be welcomed by the open arms of David's parents, Sarah knew that her life had arrived at the place she had always been searching for without knowing it. A family that chose her as much as she chose them. A love that grew from the kindness of a child, and a future that shone with all the possibilities that only true love can offer. The hug that Jake had offered that day on Fifth Avenue had truly changed 2 lives forever. In fact, it had changed 3 lives, creating a family where there had once been only loneliness and fear. And as they walked toward the house, hand in hand under the starry sky of San Francisco, Sarah knew that this was just the first page of a story that had barely begun.